I'm going to get straight to the point with this one. Often with my videos, I do a little introduction, but I'm going to get straight to the point. This video is about anti-white racism, and that's it really. It's not reverse racism. It's not sort of a reactionary response. It's simply the issue of anti-white racism, and I think that's how it should be seen. Um, and I have a particular subject in mind, but I want to talk a bit broader than that. Firstly, a quick word about the last live stream. Thank you for everyone who joined in. If you miss any of my live streams, don't worry, I'll do them periodically. I do them at different times just for the reason that people have different schedules. I think if I was to time them for any one particular time, it would be, I don't know, I just think at the moment this method works, so that's the approach I'm going for. Also, for my own lifestyle, it's more convenient for me to do it sporadically rather than set a designated time. Okay, regarding the Theatre Royal Stratford East in East London, this is the theatre that notoriously called on white patrons to stay away from its upcoming performance of Tambo and Bones, which apparently is described as a racially charged, this is according to the website, a racially charged play on the black experience. Yeah, the director is Matthew Shea, that's XIA. Um, I think it's toxic, and I made a video about that specific story. And I'm not the only one that feels that way. A lot of people have found that to be a disgrace because basically they're discriminating against a segment of the population, a big segment of the population, um, by telling white patrons to stay away. Or rather, I don't think they actually specify white, but non-black. So that would also be Asian and Hispanic people. But I think it's pretty obvious that they mean white. But stay away. That's the point. That's the underlying theme of their message, because they want this to be a blackout event. Now, this isn't a general entrance policy, but the logic is that the so-called blackout event is to give a safe space to black patrons so they can, find empathy. I have a few questions. Number one, is this really about a safe space, or is it because maybe there's actually racism in the play itself? Racially charged language about white people or non-black people. Um, makes you wonder why exactly they want white people to stay away. That's the first point. The second point is when they talk about a safe space, that in itself raises questions because the whole idea of a safe space is the notion of some sort of perceived external threat, right? So, by extension, what they are implying is that white people are the threat and the enemy. The irony, of course, is there will be many white people on the woke left who would absolutely endorse the message of the play, who would absolutely want to see it. So this is the irony. They're actually polarizing people potentially on the side. And I have to say, white woke leftists are pretty foolish anyway. They will be the first to self-flagellate. And they will literally hear anti-white racism to their face and endorse it because they want to be woke and they want to think, oh well, I'm thinking outside the box. I'm trying to understand their point of view. When really all you're doing is enabling a regressive attitude. Um, Nicole Vassell had a piece in The Independent and it appeared yesterday in Microsoft News because they do a lot of links to various news outlets. She was writing in The Independent, but basically she was describing the reaction to this controversy as overblown, as typical right-wing reactionary behaviour, and she was basically trying to downplay the whole thing. And the gist of her argument was, I should say she is black, the gist of her argument was that the outrage ignores the fact that theatre is predominantly white. But she's ignoring the fact that, firstly, that's an interesting way to justify discrimination. But, if you take that logic, that there should be safe spaces for a group that's best represented in a particular industry, Well, you could then argue white basketball players should have some sort of safe space. The NBA is largely dominated by African Americans, you know, or the rap industry. What if white rappers wanted a safe space? Well, of course, that isn't going to happen because the aggro world of rap that wouldn't happen anyway. But it's just a very flawed argument, and I think it's an argument for racism. I'm sick and tired of certain minority races thinking that they can get a green pass, uh, a pass to just basically come out with these attitudes. Well, it was interesting on that report. There's a little thumbs up, thumbs down mechanism, which is sort of a barometer to see where the public sentiment lie with something. Now, there was 50 thumbs up, that is 50 people ostensibly agreeing with her, 852 thumbs down. In other words, the overwhelming consensus was against her narrative. And I think that tells us what we need to know. I think most reasonable people would recognize this is wrong. I've seen many black people speak out against it. And I'm not just talking about black commentators on GB News. When I posted this on one of the forums I'm in, there's a black guy there who agreed with what I was saying. And we haven't always agreed. We've differed on other matters, but he could see where I was coming from, and he said it's a disgrace. So I call on all reasonable black people, condemn this, just condemn it. You know, if white people are expected to condemn white racism, then black people should condemn black racists. This notion that one black person speaks for everyone. So, for example, Matthew Shea will no doubt say that he alone is the voice of black empowerment, or at least he and those who think like him. I think the man's a racist, and I would happily say it to his face. The fact that he is literally telling white people to stay away from his play. Um, it goes without saying that if a white director were to come out with something similar, it would be unacceptable. And actually, there is ground that this violates the Racial Equality Act of 2010. Now, in that Act of Parliament, it was clearly stated that it is illegal to discriminate against someone on grounds of race. It's illegal. Now, I think the theatre is covering themselves somewhat because I think they put a disclaimer somewhere saying we're, everyone's welcome. But that really is just a legal disclaimer. The question here is, even if white people can technically attend, they're not welcome. Asian people aren't welcome. Only those who identify as black. Well, indeed, in this whole landscape of self-identifying, maybe I could call myself black. Could they really say I wasn't? I mean, the way society is going, you have to wonder. But I think this theatre thing, it's a problem. But it's a catalyst for wider problems. Just briefly, before I get on to those issues, I thought, well, rather than just complaining about this, as a lot of people do, I think it's important that we don't just complain, we do something about it. So I decided to hell with it. I went to the Metropolitan Police website. Now I haven't reported it as a crime because I don't know if it would actually fall under that banner, and I don't want to be accused of wasting police time. But they do have a segment on the Metropolitan Police website. They have a segment saying, "Tell us about something you're concerned about." Now that can cover issues that you think they should just know about, and I did. I made a report about this, and maybe I'll get a reply in a few days. Whether they act on it or not is another matter. Um, but it has to be said, if police can intervene when there is a pub in Essex showing gollywogs, then I think there would be a case for intervening here. And by the way, I'm not supporting that pub. I think they need to drag themselves into the 21st century. Numerous police turned up to that. Um, so at the very least, I think the police should investigate this to clarify exactly what their entrance policy is. It doesn't matter that it's just one production as opposed to a general entrance policy. One is one too many. Discrimination is discrimination, whatever way you gloss it over. And I think when black identitarians try to justify this by saying they're trying to make empowerment or they're trying to create a safe space, they need to be called out for the blatant racism that they're displaying. They need to be challenged. Why is it that you think white people are a threat? All white people. And if they can't answer that, then they're going to just dig themselves a hole. Um, but I think what really is problematic in this subject is that there is very, very clearly a lack of consistency applied. I think that anti-white racism still gets a free pass, still, and that's very sad. Um, this is not to say that it won't attract controversy. It will. I mean, if you get an anti-white professor or a situation like this, there will be anger and there will be a lot of people commenting on it. So I'm not saying that there's no reaction, but is it the same response in terms of officialdom? I'm not sure that it is. Um, and there are many cases to cite. I mean, not long ago, it would have been about 2 or 3 years ago now. Um, there was a controversy at Oxford University when David Starkey, the historian, came out with a comment about black people, and it was insulting, and it was, I think it's right that he should have faced some backlash for that because it was an insulting comment. He said there's too many damn blacks, his words. Um, but basically he lost his position at the university. Now he doubled down and he said that he believed in stoicism and so on. That's well, he actually, I say doubled down, but he apologized, but he doubled down in terms of the sacking. At the same time, the very same time, now I don't know if it was Oxford or Cambridge, but it was one of the Oxford universities. Dr. Priyamvada Gopal, who's of Indian descent, she made a racially charged comment about white people. Instead of being sacked, she gets defended by her woke students, defended by the institution, and basically kept in position. Now, I call this a tale of two academics. Why is it that one is penalised and the other isn't? Could it be that one of these people making racially charged statements is white and the other is Indian? Therefore, one gets away with it and one doesn't. I think it's very, very obvious that is the case. And I think a lot of this is important from the United States. And I think a term like white privilege, I think anyone using it needs to face scrutiny and condemnation. Not long ago, the head of Bernardo's actually used it, and he claimed that he wasn't trying to trivialize the problems faced by underprivileged white children. The whole point of Bernardo's is it's a children's charity. It's meant to be in the business of helping underprivileged children and abused children. And that could be any children, they could be black, white, or Asian. The head of a major charity to come out with that was a complete disgrace. I wish I'd complained at the time. I didn't. I was actually volunteering in Bernardo's at that time, and I remember it was on my mind. And I'm thinking, well, I'm really tempted to write the guy a letter and tell him what I think of this, and actually say, look, I'm volunteering for this charity. And to be honest, I kind of wish I had. I'm not sure what held me back. Just I didn't want it to. I think I didn't want it to sound like I was speaking for the particular branch that I was in, whereas I was speaking for myself. Although knowing the people I work with, they probably would have agreed with me. Um, it was a disgraceful thing, for a major charity head to come out with that. But sadly, it's far from unique. Um, there's this dangerous conflation with being progressive somehow means, frankly, being anti-white, or in the case of gender issues, being anti-male. A lot of feminists think that they're demonstrating egalitarianism by basically just bashing men at every opportunity they get, sometimes over very trivial issues, and sometimes often over issues that involve both men and women. One of the latest ones I saw, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but this freelance journalist had written about how men dominate the pavement and constantly push us women out of the way. Well, that's a very sweeping sort of statement that she didn't provide much basis for, but regardless, it's a sweeping statement. I mean, a lot of this is based on the interesting thing is it's not necessarily aggressive racism. It's not like I'm not saying that there's necessarily a situation where, for example, you get a gang of black people or Asian people attacking white people and sort of this violent, naked racism in that sense, although no doubt that does also happen. No, it's more in the form of so-called academia, like this sort of progressive school of thought, and yet it's nothing of the sort. So most likely you'll see it in education, in the arts. I think it's rampant in those areas. in healthcare, seeping into healthcare. There was a nurse who had to take the course. And she made a legal case because of her Christian background, but also it was about, this course in white privilege, and she refused, and she then faced disciplinary action. Um, this is really, we can see this across society. And what I find really galling is when these things are brought up, the woke left will say it's hyperbole, it's exaggeration, it's the right trying to find a controversy, it's the right pushing the culture wars. I think you have some brass neck. You have some brass neck because they're the very people who are trying to, cancel out speakers that they don't agree with. They're the very people who are pushing identity politics. They're the very people who coin terms such as microaggressions, white privilege. So they have some brass neck to be accusing I was going to say the whites, to be accusing the right of pushing the culture wars. And you know what's sad about all of this? It pushes people in onto the defensive. It pushes people into a position where they have to speak up. Now, I have no interest in being some sort of white identitarian or saying I'm a representative of the white people. I'm not interested in that. Plenty of white people I've got no time for. And I would never have anything to do with any sort of blood and soil nationalist type group uh, or neo-Nazi group. It absolutely goes without saying. Indeed, one of my last videos was condemning the far-right neo-Nazi unit at Dorset Police. So, I'm under no illusions that those sort of nasty elements are out there. Um, a recent study found that Britain is actually one of the most tolerant countries in the world in terms of the study was asking who would you be happy living next to, for example, an ethnic minority person, a gay person, and the results showed that the UK is overwhelmingly tolerant. Um, and interestingly, of the four nations, it was Northern Ireland that came on top. This was a study by King's College London, as reported on by the Mark Stein show on GB News. But one of the researchers was King's College London, hardly a right wing establishment, and they found that 90% of people in Northern Ireland were okay with having a gay or minority neighbour. And I must admit, I was surprised that Ulster was at the top because Northern Ireland has had a history of racism and bigotry, and I'm not just talking in the Troubles. Second was England, 86%, and then Scotland and Wales both on 81%. But the point is, across the United Kingdom, across the realm, people are generally okay with having a minority or gay neighbour. That has definitely changed from maybe 30 years ago, and certainly more than 40 years ago. So Britain has become a more tolerant society over time. Some might say that's because of quotas and because of some efforts that were described as political correctness. I'm not sure that it is actually. I think there's a range of things that can explain that. Um, but I am convinced that what the so-called woke left, what they think is progressive, absolutely is not. It's divisive and it's wrong. Um, and I think there does need to be backlash when we see examples of anti-white racism. I mean, obvious racism. Um, in terms of segregation more generally, there could be some circumstances where it might be justified. Let me give an example. If you have a women's shelter, which is specially designated for women who survived domestic violence, it does make sense that that is mostly run by women because understandably, a woman who's, been a punching bag for years from some violent thug is going to be nervous around men. Now, you can't blame her for that. And it makes sense that that would be an environment. I quote that because I used to volunteer in a women's shelter, like when I was actually under 16, because grown men, they didn't actually, that it was actually was part of a wider charity endeavor I was doing at the time, charity Western Spirit. But basically there are some circumstances, or another example would be maybe if you have well, the whole issue of women's spaces that gets into a clash with trans ideology, but that's maybe for another video. But in terms of race, I see absolutely no justification for racial segregation in this day and age, none. But it has to be evenly applied. I mean, let's look at the world of casting and so-called colorblind casting. When you get woke directors casting black actors in historically white character roles, they say it's progressive and they say it's colorblind, except it's not colorblind because colorblind wouldn't be pushing an agenda. And they are pushing an agenda. Presenting Anne Boleyn as a black woman is everyone with a brain can see through that. They can see what they're trying to do. And for me personally, I can't look at that and be thinking of the history of it. I can't be thinking, okay, that's the Protestant Reformation, the break with Rome, the divorce from Catherine of Aragon. I'm not thinking of the history and politics. I'm thinking they've cast a black woman to play Anne Boleyn. And no matter how good an actress she is, that is a reality. Um, but the whole narrative is it's archaic and inappropriate and offensive to have white actors playing historically minority roles. And I actually agree with that. I think it is a bit naff and a bit I do think it's inappropriate in this day and age to have a white actor play a historically black character. We think to John Wayne playing Genghis Khan, that is silly. And even then, it was people could say it was the context of the time. Well, it did deny minority actors those roles. That's true. But I don't see how you fix a problem by, the expression two wrongs don't make a right. Well, it's the same principle. So it's all very well saying, oh, but for years the screen has been doing that to minority actors. Well, how do you then right the wrong by basically doing the same thing? By, as a minority actor, playing roles that are historically white characters. I think it's particularly important when we're talking about history. It's a bit more, I think there's a bit more ground for flexibility with fictional characters like we're thinking of the Ariel controversy now. There's a bit more ground for flexibility because really Ariel's a mythical creature. She's a mermaid. Although most people's perception is, Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid, which is generally perceived to be a white girl. And of course, the famous Disney version, the white Ariel with red hair. But I would say there's more ground for flexibility, at least with that. But with historic characters, no. Pushing an agenda, and I think it's manipulative because then people react and they say it's right wing trolls. I'm not right wing, I'm on the side of common sense. This really shouldn't be seen as a right or left wing issue. I mention it because I think the woke left is being very manipulative and dishonest. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I would like to see minority racists not just called out because that's going to happen anyway, but called out on social media, but I would like to see the same consequences as you would get with a white racist. Exactly the same. Now, as it stands, if black footballers get abused on the pitch, the culprits will be banned. And rightly so, they might even face a prison sentence. Whether that's right or not is another matter. But the point is, there's real consequences. No player should have to put up with that abuse. It's a disgrace. It's disgusting, ugly behaviour, and no player should have to put up with it. But why is that taken more seriously than anti-white racism? When you get Black Lives Matter activists literally dehumanizing white people, why is that any more acceptable? Um, that's why I think Starmer made a big mistake by endorsing Black Lives Matter as he did. I think there was too many on the left who were jumping over themselves to do that. But I think at its core, Black Lives Matter is a pretty racist organisation. I don't think everyone in it is a racist, but I think that there is a basic racism at its core. Um, you know, it was supposedly about police brutality, but it's very clear that when you start seeing identity politics seep into that, someone also said in one of my recent videos that when minority racism gets a pass, it fuels white racism. In a way, that's probably true. Sadly, one extreme fuels the other. So white nationalists get emboldened by this stuff, and I don't want them to be emboldened. I think they're toxic. Um, but they are emboldened by it because then they can say, put out the narrative that white people are persecuted. That's not true. White people are not persecuted, but there is clearly double standards. Clearly glaringly double standards. And I do think that there is a disconnect between the public and institutions, particularly media outlets like the BBC. I think on this issue, the BBC is tone deaf, arrogant, ignorant, maybe willfully ignorant. They do not apply the same standards, and that is glaringly obvious. Um, that controversy, for example, at the coronation, the black actress who made the comment about the balcony being so white, it frustrated a lot of people. Now, she was actually going to apologise, to be fair to her. Then a BBC employee, forget his name now, actually came out and said, "You've got nothing to apologise for." So that shows the mindset of the BBC. Then they doubled down and said, "Oh, they weren't. The BBC wasn't downplaying the criticism." Well, that's exactly what they were doing. They were trying to delegitimise it. This woke Pratt was actually, she was about to apologise, and he actually interjected and said, "No, you don't have to," as if he has a right to speak for people who were complaining. How dare he? Um, it's just glaringly obvious that this is still permitted. It's still like given a free pass. And when people raise this issue, they're laughed at. They're seen as right-wing reactionaries, as gamins. It really disgusts me because I think all it does is foster divisions. But we have to have the integrity and the honesty and the courage, quite frankly, to say what is wrong is wrong. Now, as a white guy, I will always condemn white racists, and I always have. But I'm not going to stay silent and be okay with people saying, um, you know, we're going to judge you because of the color of your skin. They can go to hell. I think they need to know that they cannot call the shots because for too damn long they have been.